Well, a difficult situation on the front lines. That acknowledgement today from Ukraine's defence minister as his country's military faces increasing challenges and threats from Russia. His assessment being supported by British intelligence, which says conditions along the front lines are less stable than at any time during the war. A top UK defence official had some stark comments today about what could happen if Russia expands its war into Eastern Europe. Have a listen.
If the British Army was asked to fight tonight,
yes,
it would fight tonight. And I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that fight.
Well, this coming a day after Russia launched what President Vladimir Putin calls a new missile on Ukraine's Dnipro region. The Kremlin calling it a response to, quote, reckless decisions by Western countries supplying weapons to Ukraine. Well, fear of additional Russian attacks prompted Ukraine's parliament to close for the day. There's a lot going on here. Nick Paton-Walsh back with us this hour from Kyiv. That remark by the UK defence official really underscoring the danger of this moment. What do you make of the comments, and where do things stand on not just the front lines, but the escalation that could include, at this point, certainly threats from Russia suggest it could include Eastern Europe?
I mean, he's essentially reiterating NATO's Article 5 promise to each other that if Eastern Europe NATO members were invaded, the rest of NATO would come to their aid. But that promise has always been something that NATO made to each other because they felt they would never need to actually voice it. And I think we're at a perilous moment here, not because Russia is about to invade Eastern Europe. Look, they're struggling to take the parts of Ukraine they want, a significantly inferior neighbour they thought they could invade in a matter of weeks. Those comments mark the escalation between NATO, the US, and Russia that we've seen dramatically increase in the last week. Now, the missile that Russia launched at Dnipro was a clear message to the NATO alliance about the fact that Moscow feels it still has in its toolkit capabilities that could defeat Western air defences. That's what Vladimir Putin's main point when he talked about the Oreshnik Mark 10 hypersonic non-nuclear missile. You could see in the images it was able to deliver multiple warheads from one missile. That's the kind of thing you normally associate with a nuclear payload. Not here, but that was the subtext of what we saw. And Becky, look, we've seen here increased bombardment of Ukraine, nightly horrific bombardment. A lot of it facilitated by ballistic missiles, significantly less fancy, you might say, than that which we saw over Dnipro in the early hours of yesterday morning. A lot of them too from a new ally, well, a more vocal, more persistent, more present ally to Russia, North Korea. Here's what we know.
The scramble for the dead or the living, horrifically commonplace in Ukraine. Yet this series of homes in Kiev turned to rubble by something other. Not Russian, but a North Korean supplied ballistic missile, and made able to fly here to cause this barbarism, killing a man and his 4-year-old son by circuitry from the United States. Ukrainian officials told CNN ballistic missile attacks by Russia were rising fast, 194 so far this year, and about a third of them, at least 60, were using North Korean KN-23s. But these crude missiles, part of growing aid as North Korean troops also come to Russia, rely on a sophistication smuggled into the Hermit Kingdom. One on display by Ukrainian investigators at this Kiev warehouse of missile fragments. It is a house of horrors, drones that haunt the night skies, rockets that tear down lives. They pick through the dust to learn how the killing machines work, here rebuilding a Shahed Iranian drone's circuits.
Parts from a Kinjal missile, a Shahed Iranian drone and a Russian Orlan reconnaissance drone, all things Ukraine has been subjected to for many months, but key, these North Korean KN-23 missiles rely on, they say, on components from the United States and the Netherlands.
This box, containing dozens of small bits of circuitry made by household names in the USA or Europe, subject to sanctions globally, but smuggled, often via China, to North Korea.
When you open all this up and find American components, how do you feel?
Чувствується, що якось не дуже санкції працюють, то що
залишки корпуса ракети, вся електронна начинка, вся іноземна. Корейського там нічого нема. Корейський тільки метал, який швидко ржавіє.
The journey the chips and circuits take to Russia may lead through North Korea, even China as a middleman, though ultimately they are US design and make.
Чіпи ми розуміємо, що в основному це є Сполучених Штатів, але країна-виробник може бути і Китай, і може бути Малайзія, тобто і Тайвань, самі. Але це є штаб-квартири, знаходяться, ми маємо на увазі Сполучених Штатів.
As the toll from these missiles deepens, Ukrainian officials say the Western firms need to be held accountable. From Thursday's Russian launch of a new weapon to their growing use of purloined North Korean missiles, the global reach of this war grows.
Now, I should point out that we've heard from a Ukrainian security source that they believe there are North Korean technical personnel wearing Russian uniforms, but in a different part of the frontline area, the port city of Mariupol. So many of the 11,000 or so North Korean troops sent here are thought to mostly be in the Kursk region, trying to help Russia kick Ukraine out of that. But it's growing evidence, really, of North Korea not being the most powerful ally Russia could find globally, that this is increasingly an international conflict. And look, Becky, just after the remarkable week we've had that began with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz ringing Vladimir Putin, kind of trying to get peace talks started, doing it for his own domestic political reasons, and I think infuriating some of his allies, we've now got to a point where the United States has let Ukraine fire US missiles into Russia. It's hard to overstate how significant a step that is, one that Biden said he wouldn't take for months because of how escalatory it would be. And then Moscow, while many sort of, debated as to whether this would be another red line that Russia let fly past it, instead they seem to have found a way of responding, and a way which was, while having no nuclear element to it at all, was sort of ridden with a nuclear subtext, flying in the direction of Western Europe, and I think trying the Kremlin desperately to remind Washington that it's not a spent force, exhausted by this war, that it retains surprises. Becky?
Yeah, and there are clearly real concerns, not just in Washington, but in these European capitals and at NATO headquarters at present. Nick, it's really good to have you there. Thank you very much.
When we look at where things stand from a U.S. perspective, this missile attack, what we're hearing as well from Russia in terms of what is being said, what is the reaction there at the Pentagon?
Well, Erica, a U.S. official said overnight that they are considering the implications of the use of this new missile for NATO's force posture, for its own deterrence. Of course, this is a weapon that the Russians, according to the U.S., have not actually used in combat before. It has not been used outside of testing. But they also say that the implications of the use of this missile on the war in Ukraine really can't be it can't be overstated. Essentially, what they're saying is that this is an interesting data point. It is obviously a sign that the Russians are trying to engage in nuclear saber rattling here, because, as Nick said, this is a weapon that was designed really to carry multiple nuclear warheads. This one did not. It carried conventional warheads. But ultimately, the U.S. does believe that they only have a few of these in their arsenal at the moment, and that Ukraine has actually withstood missile attacks from missiles with far larger payloads than what that missile had yesterday. So this is a concerning development, of course, and something that the U.S. is watching and analyzing very closely, particularly as it relates to how, if things escalated even further, a missile like that could be used against NATO, against those eastern flank NATO countries. But they are not overly kind of reacting to this at this point. They also say that, look, the Ukrainians have been able to withstand far worse at this point. Now, when it comes to the North Koreans, obviously that is the main reason why President Joe Biden gave Ukraine permission to use these long-range missiles inside Russia proper. But you can see that this is all kind of escalating in a way that the U.S. obviously does not necessarily want to see at this point. Erica.
Yeah, certainly. Natasha, really appreciate it. Thank you.